This is the ERLC Show, a production of the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium. I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. And coming up on November 29th and February 11th, we've got two sessions coming from Adrienne Gear. The first is Literacy Power Workout 2-day series, Writing Power and Powerful Understanding. And you can register for those at www.erlc.ca. And here to tell us more about both those sessions is Adrienne Gear. But let's turn it around on you. Can you, just for our listeners,
tell
sure. us? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in the education world?
So first and foremost, I'm a teacher. So I spend 2 days a week at a school in Vancouver, and I'm a classroom. I'm a non-enrolling teacher, so I'm not in a single classroom with my own class. I'm what's called a literacy support teacher, and that is working in everybody's classroom as a sort of an extra body in the room to do collaborative literacy teaching. Mm-hmm. So I usually take the initiative in the teaching component, but the classroom teacher's then in the room, and so there's two people there. She has the opportunity to maybe support some of the other students in the class that might need a little extra, but I do anything from reading, writing, poetry, lit circles, anything that the teacher would like to kind of have some support in. Mm-hmm. So that's 2 days a week, but that's sort of where I feel I'm at my best teaching self, because I love teaching. But then the other days of the week, I am often giving workshops, professional development workshops around the area of literacy, and tend to focus on elementary school reading instruction and writing instruction. So I get a chance to travel around the province and the country, and I've done a little bit of international work as well. And so to me, I have the best of both worlds. I teach children 2 days a week, and then I'm able to take that, what I learn in the classroom, and share that in other aspects with teachers. So that's what I do. And I also write books on the side of my plate.
So you are very much a busy kind of person.
Yes. So that's when you said relaxing, I just kind of laughed.
Yeah. There's certain kind of people, I think, that just have that extra fire in them, and there's not a lot you can do to kind of turn that down sometimes.
Well, what's funny is I have two speeds. I'm fast forward or completely stop. And when I stop, I literally stop, but I don't stop that often. So I'm usually on that fast forward pace.
Right. That reminds me of an old Calvin and Hobbes comic with the ultimate punchline is that, tigers only have two settings, off and high. So
exactly. That's exactly it.
So you qualify as a tiger, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess that's a good one.
So, okay, you're basically working, with literacy and writing and that kind of thing. And you're a big proponent of writing on a daily basis. Now, why is that, like, for you? Why is that such an important part of student learning?
Well, the thing that first of all, I myself love writing, and so I have that motivation that I want children to also love writing. But I think sometimes in our classrooms we don't give children that the value of what it means to be a writer. Most often in classrooms, the children are given writing assignments and they're asking questions like, well, is this for marks? And how long does this have to be? And I think the most important thing that we can do for our kids is really help them understand the purpose for what being a writer is. Mm-hmm. And that purpose is you get to share your stories and your ideas with other people. And that, in my mind, is a gift. Like, you're gifting people with stories, you're gifting people with your thoughts and feelings and ideas. And the ability to do that and do that well is a really, really powerful skill to have. So I think part of what I want teachers to try to do in their classrooms is just to bring purpose and joy in a way about writing into their class, and to be really excited, because we all know that if teachers are excited, then the kids will feed off of that excitement.
Right.
And I think that's a really valuable part of the writing program, is just giving kids that notion of purpose and gifting. I often say to kids, if you've ever gone to a birthday party and you get invited and you choose a gift for that friend really carefully, and you choose it, but you're wrapping it up, but you're kind of excited about the gift. And when you give that gift to your friend, you're waiting for them to open it because you want to see their excitement. And I often use that as a parallel. Like, I want you to feel that way about your writing, and I want you to feel that when somebody else is reading it, they get to open up your gift of thoughts and ideas and stories, and to have that excitement around the piece of writing that they're doing.
So how does assessment factor into this? Because I'm thinking, you're talking a lot about just ultimately writing, writing for the joy of writing, which I think is fantastic. But ultimately we're still in a classroom. We're still responsible for
we have to teach our kids.
Academics.
Exactly.
So how does that factor into this kind of process where we're kind of divorcing ourselves from always writing for marks, discovering your voice, these kind of things? Like how does that work out?
So I guess just one of the things that I've learned over the years at being a teacher is teaching writing. There's no end of lessons that you can focus on. And one of the problems I used to have as a writing teacher is I call it cherry picking. I would often just kind of say, oh, I have to teach writing tomorrow. What am I going to do? And then I would just, start cherry picking a lesson that I'd find in a book or I'd find online. Well, when I started teaching, there was no online, there was no Pinterest. But what happened then was that we would just be pulling out these isolated lessons to teach our kids, and then we would assess that specific piece of writing and give our children a mark. Mm-hmm. But when I'm really talking to teachers about developing a balanced and effective writing program, you can't begin your writing program by pulling out and grasping at those shiny objects, because you could fill a whole year with writing lessons that you just found on Pinterest. Like, literally, you could.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what you want to have a program that's designed around the skills that the children need. You want to be able to say at the end of the school year, my kids are better at writing now than they were when they started.
And is that different than saying my kids are better at, finding, dangling modifiers and
exactly. Because what all those isolated little lessons do is, yes, you can say they can specifically, find a suffix and circle it,
yeah.
Or they can write a simile, an isolated simile. They know what a simile is, and they can write it. But what's the point of all those isolated things? Like, you have to look at the child as a whole, as a writer, not an aspect of their writing. Mm-hmm. But when I'm talking about assessment, you really can't develop an effective writing program unless you start with assessment. You can't teach kids how to write unless you know what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. So I'm a big believer in that fall writing assessment, not on the first day of school with a cold write, but more like, right around the beginning of October, giving them a piece of writing to do. And then you take that writing and you really look at what are their strengths, what are their struggles, and then you look for the class trends. You look for the overall trends in the class that you have right in front of you. And that's going to be different than the class you had last year. So what is this class really good at? And where are the biggest gaps in their writing? Like, possibly their writing is neat and their printing is good and they leave spelling they spaces and their spelling and all of that, but their writing's boring. So I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks focusing on ways to make writing more interesting. Or you have a class that, they have tons of ideas and they've got all these wild creative ideas, but structurally the writing is really disorganized, so it's hard to follow. And so they need lessons on structure. So to me, it's all about looking at the students that you have rather than looking out at the shiny objects and grabbing them to teach. Is like you're designing a writing program based on the needs of your kids. So that's how I see assessment is, you're using the assessment to help you figure out what you need to teach.
So using it sort of diagnostically to then craft a program that's best targeted towards your students' needs.
Absolutely. It's formative assessment. That's what it's meant for.
Right. I'm feeling very convicted in this moment. I don't teach English anymore, but I taught English for about 12 years. So realizing I definitely am guilty of doing the shiny object method of teaching. I think a lot of the time it's like,
there's nothing wrong with the shiny object lessons as long as you're grabbing them because that's what your students need rather than just grabbing them because you don't know what you're going to teach the next stage. You know what I mean?
Okay. No, I feel a little better then. All right. So but I feel like
you're okay to grab the shiny. It's just as long as you're grabbing it based on need rather than just something you found on Pinterest. And the problem with Pinterest, like I get sucked into Pinterest very easily myself, but Pinterest, I think, is in a way doing teachers a disservice because it's focusing on the product and it's not really focusing on the process of getting there. Yeah. And so teachers see the end and they want that. Like, I want that glittery bulletin board. Yeah. I want it. So I'm going to just get my kids to replicate it, but not really, like what was the purpose behind it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, Pinterest definitely lends itself to, things that look nice and process it's just not it's not a very exciting thing to look at a lot of the time, right? So
it's messy and it's messy, but that's where the learning happens to me. Learning is messy. It's not glittery. It's not like polished. It's a process.
It absolutely is. It is. Yeah, I like that. And I mean, one of the things you advocate for quite strongly is like using a workshop model. So how does that dovetail with this idea of like process and iterative working?
So do you mean like a writer's workshop type thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have I guess when I think back on my beginning teacher days and the same idea of like not really knowing how to teach writing and just looking at different kind of lessons. And then writer's workshop came out based on Donald Graves and his work around process writing, that what we're doing in our classrooms is actually very different than what a professional writer goes through. Professional writers don't just take a piece of paper and start writing. They go through that process. So he took that research that he was doing around process writing, and he advocated that teachers help students go through that process. So writing lessons move from that, here's your paper, here's your topic, go, to, let's brainstorm, let's talk, let's draft, let's revise, and then let's publish. So when I first, really embraced that idea of writer's workshop, I loved the idea behind it, but I found it very stressful because I had 27 children. They were all writing on different topics, all at different stages of the writing process. So some would be drafting, some would be revising. And that was sort of the idea behind Writer's Workshop. But I just would start sweating because I didn't know what to do with myself. And then our job was to kind of go around the room with a clipboard and have these little conversations with kids about, where they are in the process. Meanwhile, there's 26 other kids.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. So I love the idea of it, but I struggled with the management piece. So what I did with my book, Writing Power, and my new book that I'm just at the end sort of finishing, is I created what I call a weekly schedule where you're going through the process, but it's a little bit more structured. So the process is plan, draft, revise. So Monday is planning day. Everyone's planning. Tuesday, everyone is drafting. And then Thursday, or whatever days, it doesn't have to be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, but Thursday's revision day. And every week, the children are in that routine. And what I value about that is if the students know the routine, your lessons go much more smoothly, right? I always find they like routine. I like routine. So that weekly practice writing, and then we're not publishing it. It's just, they're just revising it, and then it's going into their collection of practice writes.
Right.
It becomes, then they're not as invested in making it perfect, because they know it's just a practice, and this week we're going to write about friends, and we're going to practice similes. And so we're putting, we're finding one specific technique to work on, but it's just in a very informal and less kind of pressure-filled writing situation. And then if you didn't really do well on that and you ended up not finishing it, well, don't worry, because we're doing another one next week. So it becomes that kind of routine. And I just find that just for me, it's a much easier approach than the chaos of the writer's workshop.
Yes. Well, I mean, how do you train up your kids? I mean, I'm assuming they're reading through their own work or each other's work to provide feedback. Is that correct?
Yes. So on the revision day, and that's the other thing about, I always find that when it came to revising with my students, it was almost hopeless, because lots of times they would just lie and say, well, there's nothing wrong with my writing, or I fixed all my mistakes. You always get that kind of line. And then there was a time when it was a belief that you got the children to to exchange papers. So you would be reading somebody else's. But what I've learned about revision is that a lot of times we have this focus on the editing piece, the periods, capitals, punctuation. Yeah. But we're forgetting the revision piece. So I look at editing and revision as actually two sort of separate things. Editing can be done by somebody else. Like I have an editor, and she goes through and she just helps me kind of organize and periods and capitals and spelling and spacing. But the revision is making your writing better. Every writer has to go through a bit of a reflection. What part of this is working and what part of it needs fixing? So I always say to kids, like, yes, you can have somebody else edit, but you have to look at your paper. You have to look at your own writing and say, where's one or two sentences that I really look at and I think I could do much better than that? And so I try to incorporate both editing and revision. How I do the peer editing, I don't have my children edit somebody else's. I have them, though, listen to their partner read. So it's really important as a writer that you're hearing your own story being read out by yourself or by somebody else. So they can read it out to the other person. Right. But it's very important that it's the writer. Like, you think of the word revision, the root of the word revision is vision. It's the writer's vision. No one else has that vision because it's your own. So only you can be kind of fixing those pieces. So when I do editing, I kind of try to combine both the revision and the editing. And the partner is helping support by listening and reading, but they're not doing it for them.
I like that. I'm getting stuck on the whole vision revision thing. Like that's really powerful. I think there's great value in any sort of artistic or artistic, creative endeavor, to have that fresh set of eyes, be able to actually have that moment where you can look at your own work from a different perspective. Let's switch gears for a sec, because one of your big sort of boy, my words are broken today. One of your big approaches, I guess, one thing you're known for, I guess, is the idea of powerful thinking, the powerful thinking model. Can you just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. That's kind of where my passion for the whole idea of just the shifting away from looking at content and having kids memorize information, and shifting that away from that a little bit, and having kids understand the information. So when I learned way back when I was in school, how I learned was I memorized things. That's how teachers taught. It was note taking, and then you memorize those notes, and then you go and your brain would be just packed with information, and you'd go and unload it onto the page.
Yeah.
and basically walk away from that exam or test knowing you passed it, because all the information went onto the paper. But then as you walked away, what else happened to the information? It completely disappeared. Because if a person is, now that I'm older and I've done more work around that, I understand why. But the very fact of the matter is I went through an entire education system without really learning how to think. I learned how to memorize, and I learned a lot, but there was a lot I didn't really understand, because no one had taught me. And that's not because of my teachers were bad. It was just because research hadn't kind of found these ideas yet.
Yeah.
No one taught me how to find meaning in the content that I was learning or the books that I was reading. No one taught me the strategies of trying to make it stick. And when you teach children that reading or learning isn't just about what's down below in front of you, it's what you're bringing of your own thinking. That's what makes understanding happen. It's constructivism. If you're thinking of the psychology piece of it, it's constructivism. It's constructing meaning. And how you construct meaning is you find ways to make that information that you're learning about stick. And I hadn't learned, no one taught me about the glue. Like I memorized, yeah. I spewed it out, and then off I went.
Yeah, just sheer brute force.
Exactly. But now the whole idea of, and our new curriculum in BC is really looking at shifting away from content-based learning into more inquiry-based and constructivism. This is where we want to teach our children specific strategies to help them understand. So that's kind of what the powerful thinking is if we can teach children specific things about what they can bring of their own ideas into the text or into what they're learning. So some of the strategies that I focus on is making a connection. Like, what does this information remind you of? And then visualizing is another strategy that you can use to help it stick. Right. And asking questions, which is, wondering about the information as you're reading it or as you're learning it, and inferring. And there's these specific strategies that we can teach our kids to help them interact with the information rather than just put it in and spew it back out again.
Hope it stays, and just long enough to
make the test. I hope it stays, but it won't stay.
Right.
Like, it literally won't stay. If you're putting it in just to memorize it and then spewing it out, it's not going to stick. But if you, the most powerful, I think, strategy is making a connection to it. Connecting is the glue.
Absolutely.
You can learn something and say, oh, wow, that reminds me of, this. All of a sudden it's become part of your thinking process. So the powerful model of understanding is just helping kids realize that when you're trying to learn something and really understand it, your brain is on a little bit of a journey. Like your brain is going through this process of, well, you first have to take the information, but then you have to interact with it. You have to think about it. You have to connect and question. And then eventually you're going to take your thinking to that sort of final place where possibly your brain will say, wow, I never really thought about it this way before, but now this is starting to make more sense to me. So
Right.
it's a process, and it's a fascinating kind of journey of helping kids understand. It's not just, I always say to the kids, don't tell me what was in this, because I read it and I already know. I'm not interested in you telling me what was there. I'm interested in you telling me what you think of what was there, right? So
Right.
tell me what you're wondering about it, or tell me your connection to it. But don't just literally retell it to me, because I already know what it is. So maybe that was a long answer to the question, but that's the difference to me between just that really memorizing versus.
Yeah. Right on. Well, Adrienne, I mean, you've got this session coming up on a powerful understanding. And if people want to get a jump start on that, maybe just get in touch with you or interact with the kind of things that you're working with. How can they do that?
So I believe the session that's coming up at the end of November is on writing. So that session is all about helping teachers really look at assessment-based practices, looking at setting up your classroom for effective writing, trying, not to be the shiny object grabber, but more looking at, writing as a whole. So that's coming up at the end of November. Yeah. And if they're interested in more about that, then it would be looking at my book, Writing Power, but also on my website, I have, some extra sort of information about writing and some bundles and things around, effective writing. And then the Powerful Understanding, which is coming up in the new year, that is really focused again on what I was just speaking about, that whole idea of having, teaching kids more the strategies of understanding as opposed to just literal content. Right. And again, I have a book called Powerful Understanding, and that book has all that kind of information in there as well. Excellent. So read the books. That's the key. But obviously that's what's going to give people the background. And certainly coming to the workshops, I mean, there's millions of books out there. That's the thing. I mean, there's so many resources for teachers, but I think when you hear somebody talk about it, it just makes more sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, having the live body in the room with, that's 10 times more valuable, I think, because then you can always ask your questions and express.
Exactly. And then the book takes on a little bit more. Well, you've made a connection to it, right? Mm-hmm. You've made that kind of, that it comes more sort of relevant.
Excellent. Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to seeing you here in Edmonton.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, and I enjoyed talking to you.
And a big thanks again to Adrienne for sharing a bit of her knowledge with us today. Her sessions are Literacy Power Workout 2-Day Series, Writing Power, which is on November 29th, and Powerful Understanding, which is on February 11th. And you can register for both of those at www.erlc.ca. And that's it for this time. Thank you very much for listening to the ERLC Show.